7 guys, 7 completely different palates, and one personal chef who's seen it all. The secret plate swaps, the dramatic face reactions, the "I'll just have rice" moments, and the member who literally needs a 5-page menu briefing before every meal. You think you know BTS? You've watched the mukbang V-Lives, the Run BTS cooking disasters, the Bon Voyage grocery hauls. But do you really know what happens when the cameras are off and real food hits the table? Which member sends dishes back without a single bite? Who refuses to eat anything green unless it's hidden in meat? And who, brace yourself, actually enjoys the weirdest, most experimental dishes that would make most people run? From the member who eats literally everything without complaint to the one who drives every chef absolutely insane, this list is about to flip everything you thought you knew. Stay locked in, because number 7 starts now.
Number 7. Jin. If you've been in the BTS universe for more than 5 minutes, you already had a gut feeling about this one. And yeah, your instincts are absolutely right. At number 7, sitting comfortably at the very bottom of the picky eater scale, is none other than Kim Sok-jin, the man who turned eating into an entire content genre. The guy who literally built a solo broadcast empire called Eat Jin. Not a cooking show, not a recipe tutorial, but a straight-up eating show, where he just sat in front of a camera, demolished enormous portions of food, and somehow made millions of people feel warm, happy, and hungry at the same time. Let that sink in for a second. In an industry where idols are pressured to diet, to count every calorie, to maintain impossibly thin physiques, Jin went on camera and said, "Nah, I'm gonna eat, and I'm gonna make it look like the most beautiful thing in the world." And he did, for years. That alone should tell you everything you need to know about where this man stands on the picky eater spectrum. He doesn't just tolerate food. He doesn't just enjoy food. He genuinely, deeply, spiritually loves food in a way that most people reserve for their lifelong passions. According to staff members who've worked closely with BTS during their international tours, Jin was always, and I mean always, the first member to ask, "What's for dinner?" Not after rehearsal, not after the show. The moment he woke up, sometimes even before he fully opened his eyes. There are multiple accounts from backup dancers and stage crew who recall Jin walking into catering areas during overseas concert tours and immediately scanning the entire buffet line with the precision of a seasoned food critic. Except instead of judging the food, he was genuinely excited about every single option. Pasta? Amazing. Sushi? Let's go. Random local street food from a country he's never visited before? Hand it over. This is a man who, during Bon Voyage Season 1 in Northern Europe, happily ate fermented fish dishes that made other members physically recoil. During their trip to Malta, he was the one dragging members to local restaurants, insisting they try traditional dishes instead of defaulting to the safe Korean food options. And here's what makes Jin's relationship with food so fascinating from a chef's perspective. It's not just about volume, it's about genuine curiosity. Multiple sources from the Korean culinary industry have noted that Jin doesn't eat like someone who's just hungry. He eats like someone who's interested. He asks questions about ingredients, about cooking techniques, about regional variations. When BTS visited a traditional Japanese kaiseki restaurant during one of their Japan tours, staff reportedly mentioned that Jin was the only member who asked the chef about the specific type of dashi used in the soup course. That's not normal idle behavior. That's someone who has a real, educated palate and isn't afraid to explore it. And this is backed up by what we've seen on camera countless times. During Run BTS cooking episodes, Jin consistently demonstrated genuine cooking knowledge. Not just "I can follow a recipe" knowledge, but actual understanding of flavor profiles, heat control, seasoning balance, and presentation. The other members have acknowledged this repeatedly. Jungkook once said during a V-Live that Jin is the member you want cooking for you because he actually knows what he's doing and he'll eat whatever he makes, even if it goes wrong. That last part is key, even if it goes wrong, because that's the ultimate test of a non-picky eater. It's easy to enjoy food when everything is perfectly prepared by a professional chef in a 5-star restaurant. But Jin
Jin eats with the same enthusiasm whether it's a Michelin-starred meal in Paris or a slightly burnt ramyeon at 2 a.m. in the dorm. During one memorable Bangtan bomb, Jin was seen happily eating a bowl of instant noodles that he'd accidentally overcooked into a mushy, almost porridge-like consistency. The other members looked at it with visible concern. Jin? He slurped it down, gave it a genuine thumbs up, and said something along the lines of, "It's got a different texture today, but the flavor's still there." That's not just being non-picky, that's having an almost philosophical acceptance of food in all its forms. And let's talk about the range for a moment, because Jin's food range is genuinely impressive. Korean barbecue? Obviously, that's a given. He's famous for his love of galbi and samgyeopsal. But the man also genuinely enjoys sashimi, Chinese hot pot, Italian pasta, Mexican tacos, Indian curry, American burgers, Thai sum tum, Vietnamese pho. The list goes on and on. During interviews and variety show appearances, whenever the topic of food comes up, Jin has never once said, "Oh, I don't eat that," or "I'm not really into that kind of food." Never, not once, in over a decade of public appearances. That's statistically remarkable for anyone, let alone a public figure who's constantly being asked about preferences. Even his so-called least favored foods aren't really dislikes. They're just lower on his preference list. He's mentioned not being the biggest fan of certain overly sour dishes, but even then, he'll still eat them without complaint if they're served. A personal chef who worked with the group during a specific promotional period reportedly said that Jin was the easiest member to cook for by a landslide because you could literally put anything in front of him, and he'd find something to appreciate about it. That's the energy of someone who doesn't just eat to survive, he eats to experience. And maybe that's the real reason why Eat Jin became such a cultural phenomenon. It wasn't just about watching a handsome idol eat food. It was about watching someone who had a genuinely joyful, uncomplicated, beautiful relationship with eating. No guilt, no restriction, no performative behavior, just pure, honest enjoyment. In a world where food anxiety and diet culture dominate, especially in the K-pop industry, Jin's unapologetic love for food became almost revolutionary. He normalized eating well, eating happily, and eating without shame. And that, more than any specific dish or any particular meal, is why Kim Sok-jin sits at number 7, the absolute least picky eater in BTS. The man has never met a meal he didn't like, and honestly, that might be one of the most relatable things about him. So if you ever find yourself wondering who in BTS would survive any restaurant, any country, any cuisine, any late-night mystery fridge raid, it's Jin. No question, no hesitation, no leftovers. But hold on, if Jin is this easygoing about food, then who's coming up next at number 6? You might think the rest of BTS is close behind, but trust me, the gap between Jin and the next member is bigger than you'd expect. And the reasons are about to get very interesting. Stay locked in.
Number 6. Jungkook. All right, moving up to number 6. And if you're even a casual BTS fan, this one probably doesn't shock you either, but the details behind it absolutely will. Jungkook, the golden maknae, the guy who's good at literally everything: singing, dancing, drawing, filming, sports, video games, and apparently eating massive amounts of food is just another talent on that impossibly long resume. But here's the thing that separates Jungkook from Jin and pushes him one spot higher on the picky scale. Jungkook doesn't eat everything. He eats a lot, sure. His appetite is genuinely legendary among the BTS staff and crew. But there's a pattern. There's a preference system. There's a gravitational pull toward very specific categories of food that once you notice it, you absolutely cannot unsee. And that pattern has a name. That name is meat. Let's rewind for a second and set the stage, because Jungkook's relationship with food is deeply tied to his origin story, and it's actually kind of emotional when you really think about it. Jungkook left his family in Busan at the age of 15. 15! A kid who hadn't even finished growing yet, moving to Seoul alone to chase a dream that had no guarantee of success. Living in a cramped trainee dorm with 6 other guys, eating whatever big-hit entertainment's modest budget could afford at the time. In those early days, meals weren't a luxury, they were fuel. The pre-debut BTS has talked extensively about their financial struggles, and food was a huge part of that reality. They've shared stories about splitting single meals between multiple members, about eating ramyeon for days in a row because it was cheap, about craving proper home-cooked food but not being able to afford it. And for Jungkook, the youngest, the baby of the group, the kid who was still literally growing, those experiences shaped his entire approach to eating. When you grow up in a period where food is scarce and every meal matters, you develop two possible responses. Either you become extremely selective because you want every rare meal to be perfect, or you become the opposite. You eat everything put in front of you because you've learned never to waste a single bite. Jungkook landed somewhere in the middle, but leaning heavily toward the second. He became a volume eater, a clear-the-plate guy, a member who, once food arrived, attacked it with a focus and intensity that the other members have jokingly compared to watching a nature documentary. There's a famous clip from an early Bangtan bomb where the members are sharing a meal, and Jungkook is eating so fast and so efficiently that Jin, the food king himself, stops mid-bite just to stare at him in genuine amazement. That's the level we're talking about. But here's where the picky element creeps in, and it's subtle but consistent. Jungkook's food world revolves around meat. Not just as a preference, almost as an identity. Lamb skewers, that's the dish that became so synonymous with Jungkook that it literally became a fandom meme. Yangkochi, Korean-style lamb skewers, became Jungkook's unofficial signature food to the point where fans would bring lamb skewer plushies to fan signs, where lamb skewer emoji combinations became code for Jungkook in group chats, where entire fan art series were dedicated to Jungkook surrounded by mountains of lamb skewers. And it wasn't manufactured or exaggerated. The man genuinely, obsessively loves lamb skewers. He's mentioned them in interviews, on V-Lives, during casual conversations caught on behind-the-scenes footage. Staff members have confirmed that during late-night recording sessions, if someone asked Jungkook what he wanted for a food delivery order, the answer was lamb skewers at least 7 times out of 10. But it goes beyond lamb skewers. Samgyeopsal, thick-cut pork belly grilled at the table, is another obsession. Beef galbi, dak galbi, chicken in virtually any form, fried, grilled, roasted, braised. If it's protein, if it once had legs or wings, Jungkook is in. During Run BTS episodes that involved cooking challenges, pay attention to what Jungkook gravitates toward when choosing ingredients. It's almost always meat first. He'll build an entire dish concept around the protein and treat everything else, the rice, the vegetables, the side dishes, as supporting actors. Which brings us to the flip side, and this is where chefs start to notice the gap between Jungkook and someone like Jin. Vegetables. Jungkook's relationship with vegetables is diplomatic at best. He doesn't hate them. He's never gone on record saying, "I refuse to eat vegetables." But there's a visible, documented, repeatedly observed lukewarm energy when it comes to greens on his plate. During multiple Bangtan bombs and Run BTS episodes, you can catch moments where Jungkook subtly, sometimes not so subtly, pushes vegetable side dishes to the edge of his plate or strategically buries them under rice to create the illusion of consumption. It's the kind of thing a chef notices immediately. One culinary professional who consulted for a BTS-adjacent event mentioned that Jungkook's plate always came back with meat completely demolished and vegetables rearranged but largely untouched, like a kid who's trying to convince his parents he ate his broccoli. And honestly, that tracks perfectly with Jungkook's whole vibe, because despite being one of the most talented, hard-working, disciplined performers on the planet, when it comes to food, Jungkook retains this wonderfully boyish, almost childlike approach. He eats what he loves with absolute passion, tolerates what he doesn't love without making a fuss, and quietly avoids what he's not interested in without creating drama. It's not picky in the aggressive sense. It's picky in the "I know what I like and I'm going to fill up on that first" sense. And let's talk about his comfort food dependency, because it's another telltale sign. Jungkook has a deep, almost emotional attachment to comfort foods. Banana milk, the iconic yellow carton that became another fandom symbol, represents something beyond just a drink preference. It's nostalgia. It's the taste of childhood. It's the thing that made a 15-year-old kid in a strange city feel like home was still reachable. Instant ramyun eaten late at night after exhausting practice sessions. Pizza. Specifically, he's expressed love for pizza multiple times, and during overseas schedules, pizza is often one of his first requests. These are all comfort-driven choices, and they reveal something important about how Jungkook relates to food. For him, eating isn't the intellectual, exploratory adventure that it is for Jin. It's emotional. It's about safety, familiarity, and satisfaction. Which means when something unfamiliar shows up on the plate, an exotic ingredient he's never tried, a dish with a texture he's not used to, a flavor profile that's far from his comfort zone, Jungkook doesn't reject it outright, but he approaches it with visible caution. During Bon Voyage and other travel content, you can see this pattern play out in real time. While Jin dives headfirst into local cuisine with zero hesitation, Jungkook often hangs back for a beat, watches someone else try it first, and then decides to commit. It's not dramatic, it's not disruptive, it's just careful. And from a chef's perspective, that careful approach, that slight gravitational pull back toward the familiar, that meat-centric comfort zone, that gentle but consistent avoidance of vegetables, is what places Jungkook one notch above Jin on the picky scale. He's far from difficult. Any chef would be happy to cook for him because his preferences are clear, consistent, and easy to accommodate. Give him meat, give him rice, give him something warm and filling, and Jungkook is the happiest person in the room. But ask him to get excited about a kale salad or a vegetable-forward tasting menu? You'll get polite compliance, sure, but not the fire in the eyes enthusiasm that a plate of lamb skewers ignites. And that distinction, small as it might seem, is exactly what separates number 6 from number 7. Jungkook eats well, eats big, and eats happy, but within a slightly narrower lane than Jin. The golden maknae is golden at many things, but when it comes to food diversity, there's a comfort zone that he quietly, adorably, stubbornly refuses to leave. Now, if Jungkook is already showing signs of selectiveness at number 6, what do you think is waiting at number 5? Because the next member on this list takes having preferences to a different level, and the reason why might genuinely surprise you. Keep watching.
Number 5, BTS V. Number 5. And this is where the list starts to get genuinely interesting, because the member sitting right here in the middle of the pack is someone most fans wouldn't immediately associate with being picky at all. Kim Taehyung. V, the man with the deep baritone voice, the otherworldly visuals, the effortlessly cool aura that makes everything he does look like a scene from an indie film, including the way he eats. Because here's the thing about Taehyung and food that doesn't get talked about nearly enough. He's not picky in the way you'd traditionally define picky. He doesn't throw tantrums, he doesn't refuse plates, he doesn't make faces or push food away with visible disgust. What Taehyung does is something far more subtle, far more deeply rooted, and honestly far more fascinating from a culinary psychology standpoint. He carries his hometown in his taste buds, every single meal, every single bite. And that, in the world of professional chefs who need to craft diverse menus for global superstars traveling to dozens of countries every year, creates a very specific and uniquely challenging kind of selectiveness. Let's start from the beginning, because you cannot understand Taehyung's relationship with food without understanding where he comes from. Kim Taehyung grew up in Gachong, a small rural county in Gyeongsang province, surrounded by farmland, mountains, and the kind of tight-knit agricultural community where food isn't something you buy, it's something you grow, harvest, prepare, and share with your hands. His grandparents were farmers. Taehyung has spoken about this multiple times throughout BTS's career, and every time he does, there's a warmth in his voice that's different from how he talks about almost anything else. He grew up eating food that came directly from the earth, fresh vegetables from the family garden, homemade doenjang crafted from soybeans fermented in clay pots in the backyard, rice harvested from nearby paddies, kimchi made in massive batches during kimjang season with the entire extended family gathered together. This isn't just background information, this is the foundation of everything Taehyung looks for in a meal. When a chef puts a plate in front of Kim Taehyung, what he's unconsciously measuring isn't whether the dish is technically excellent, or whether the ingredients are premium, or whether the presentation is Instagram-worthy. He's measuring whether it feels like home. And that is an incredibly high, incredibly specific, and incredibly emotional bar to clear. His favorite food, and he stated this so consistently over the years that it's become one of those undeniable BTS facts, is japchae. Glass noodles stir-fried with vegetables, beef, and seasoned with soy sauce and sesame oil. It's not fancy, it's not exotic, it's a dish that virtually every Korean grandmother knows how to make. A dish that shows up at every holiday table, every family celebration, every welcome home dinner. And that's the point. Taehyung doesn't gravitate toward japchae because of its flavor complexity or its culinary prestige. He gravitates toward it because it tastes like being 6 years old in his grandmother's kitchen, sitting on the warm ondol floor, watching her hands move with decades of muscle memory as she prepared food with love as the primary ingredient. And this nostalgic anchor extends to almost everything he eats. Doenjang, the earthy, pungent, deeply savory soybean paste stew that's a staple of Korean home cooking, is another Taehyung essential. Not the refined, restaurant-elevated version with premium ingredients and careful plating. The messy, bubbling, almost aggressive version that's been simmering in a stone pot for hours. The kind where the doenjang is homemade and funky and unapologetically intense. Galbi, braised or grilled short ribs marinated in a sweet soy mixture, prepared the way it's done in South Gyeongsang province, which has its own regional variations that differ from Seoul-style preparations. These aren't just preferences, they're emotional coordinates on a map that always points back to Gyeongsang. And this is where things get complicated for chefs, because when BTS travels internationally, and they travel a lot, Taehyung's palate doesn't always travel with the same enthusiasm. Staff members who've managed food logistics during world tours have noted a consistent pattern. In the first few days of being in a new country, Taehyung will gamely try local cuisine. He'll take bites, he'll nod politely, he'll even find things he genuinely enjoys. But as the days stretch on, as the tour schedule gets more grueling, as the physical and emotional exhaustion of performing for tens of thousands of people every night starts to accumulate, Taehyung's food requests start drifting back to Korean food with almost gravitational certainty. It's not conscious, it's not demanding, it's more like watching a compass needle slowly, inevitably swing back to north. He'll start asking if there's a Korean restaurant nearby. He'll quietly request kimchi as a side dish regardless of what the main meal is. He'll light up visibly, and staff members have noted this specifically, when someone manages to source proper Korean ingredients and prepares something that approximates the flavors of home. During Bon Voyage Season 4 in New Zealand, there's a moment that perfectly captures this dynamic. The group is exploring local cuisine, trying lamb dishes and seafood and various Western preparations, and Taehyung is participating, but there's a subtle restlessness. Then later, when the group manages to cook Korean food together, ramyeon, rice, simple banchan, Taehyung's entire demeanor shifts. He relaxes, he smiles wider, he eats more. It's like watching someone take off an uncomfortable pair of shoes and finally sink their feet into familiar ground. And this isn't a criticism, it's a deeply human, deeply relatable trait. Food psychologists have extensively documented the phenomenon of taste nostalgia, where the flavors we grew up eating become hardwired into our reward systems, creating an emotional baseline that no amount of culinary exploration can fully replace. For Taehyung, who left Gyeongsang for Seoul as a teenager to pursue an uncertain dream in the entertainment industry, those hometown flavors represent more than just food. They represent stability, identity, and an unbroken connection to the person he was before the world knew his name. But here's where it specifically affects his position on this list. Unlike Jin, who approaches every cuisine as an adventure, or Jungkook, who's happy as long as there's meat and comfort food regardless of the cultural origin, Taehyung has a narrower window of maximum food enjoyment that's heavily weighted towards Korean food, and specifically towards the rustic, home-style Korean cooking of his childhood region. Put a perfectly executed French dish in front of him,
He'll eat it, he might even appreciate it, but it won't hit the same. Put a bowl of his grandmother's doenjang jjigae in front of him, his eyes change, his shoulders drop. He eats slower, more deliberately, savoring every spoonful like he's trying to memorize it. Chefs notice this. They notice when a diner eats to complete a meal versus when a diner eats because the food is speaking to something deeper inside them. And with Taehyung, that deeper connection is reserved almost exclusively for a specific category of food: Korean, traditional, home-style, soul-warming, grandma approved. Everything else is acceptable, but never transcendent. There's also his relationship with textures, which is another subtle but real factor. Taehyung has shown mild but consistent sensitivity to certain food textures, particularly anything overly slimy or gelatinous that doesn't fall within the Korean food texture vocabulary he grew up with. Raw oysters, for example, have gotten visibly cautious reactions from him in filmed content. Certain types of unfamiliar seafood preparations, things with unexpected slippery or rubbery textures, don't get rejected outright, but they get approached with a wariness that's noticeably different from how he approaches familiar textures. It's not a deal breaker for a chef, but it's another data point in the Taehyung has a specific comfort zone file. And the strawberry thing, we can't talk about Taehyung and food without mentioning strawberries. His love for strawberries is so well documented, so frequently expressed, so genuinely intense that it's become another one of those iconic Taehyung associations. Strawberries, strawberry-flavored desserts, strawberry milk. These exist in a special category in Taehyung's food universe, a category of pure, uncomplicated joy that transcends the Korean food or nothing dynamic. It's almost childlike in its purity, and it adds a sweet, endearing dimension to his overall food personality. So where does all of this leave V on the picky scale? Solidly at number 5, right in the middle. He's not difficult, he's not demanding, he won't make a chef's life miserable, but he has a clearly defined center of gravity in his food preferences that's more restrictive than Jin's eat everything philosophy or Jungkook's give me meat and I'm happy simplicity. Taehyung's pickiness isn't about rejection, it's about longing. It's about a soul that no matter how far it travels, no matter how many stages it conquers, no matter how many countries it visits, always tastes home first and measures everything else against it. And honestly, that might be the most beautiful kind of pickiness on this entire list. But don't get too comfortable in the warmth of that sentiment, because number 4 is about to shift the energy in a direction you might not expect. The next member's food story isn't about nostalgia or comfort, it's about something else entirely, and it's going to make you rethink what picky really means. Stay right here.
Number 4, RM. Number 4. And if the last few entries have been somewhat predictable, this is where the list takes a sharp left turn into territory that most fans genuinely don't see coming. Kim Namjoon, RM. The leader, the genius-level IQ polymath who reads Nietzsche for fun, visits art museums on his days off, writes lyrics that university professors have analyzed in academic papers, and speaks about life with the kind of depth that makes you forget he's a pop star and start thinking he might be a philosopher who accidentally wandered onto a stage. So what does any of that have to do with being a picky eater? Everything. Because Namjoon doesn't just eat food, he thinks about food. And that, paradoxically, is exactly what makes him pickier than you'd ever expect. Here's the thing that chefs and food service professionals pick up on almost immediately when working with someone like Namjoon. There's a massive difference between a person who's picky because they have a limited palate and a person who's picky because they have an analytical palate. Namjoon falls squarely into the second category, and in many ways, that's actually harder to cook for. Because a person with a limited palate is predictable. You learn their safe foods, you stick to the list, everyone's happy. But a person with an analytical palate, their preferences shift based on mood, context, intellectual curiosity, health goals, philosophical beliefs about sustainability, and about 15 other variables that change on any given Tuesday. Welcome to the beautiful, complicated, slightly maddening world of cooking for Kim Namjoon. Let's start with the intellectual curiosity angle, because it's the most obvious and the most uniquely Namjoon. This is a man who, when he travels to a new city, doesn't just look up best restaurants near me like a normal person. He researches the food culture. He reads about the agricultural history of the region. He wants to understand why a particular dish exists, what historical circumstances led to its creation, what socioeconomic factors shaped the local cuisine. Multiple staff members have mentioned that Namjoon's restaurant requests during overseas schedules often come with context. Not just, I want to eat Italian food, but I read about this specific trattoria that's been family-owned for 4 generations and uses traditional Neapolitan techniques. Or there's a place that does farm-to-table dining with ingredients sourced within a 50-kilometer radius. This sounds like the opposite of picky, right? It sounds adventurous, open-minded, exploratory, and in many ways it is. Namjoon is genuinely willing to try a wide range of cuisines and dishes, far wider than several members will get to later on this list. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. Namjoon's intellectual engagement with food comes packaged with intellectual judgment about food, and that judgment creates a filtration system that, while sophisticated, is absolutely a form of selectiveness. When Namjoon evaluates a meal, he's not just asking, does this taste good? He's asking, is this authentic? Is this well-crafted? Does this respect the tradition it comes from? Is this nourishing my body in the way I want it to? And if the answer to any of those questions is no, you can see it. Not in dramatic rejection, Namjoon is far too polite and considerate to do that, but in a quiet, almost imperceptible dimming of enthusiasm, a slight slowing of his eating pace, a shift in his body language from engaged to merely courteous. Chefs who pay attention, and good chefs always pay attention, notice these signals immediately, and they reveal a palate that, while broad in theory, is surprisingly demanding in practice. Then there's the health consciousness factor, which has become increasingly significant over the years. As Namjoon has matured, both as an artist and as a person, his approach to food has shifted noticeably towards intentional, health-focused eating. This isn't a strict diet. Namjoon's not the type to follow rigid nutritional protocols, but it is a philosophical orientation toward food that eliminates certain categories from his enthusiastic yes list. The greasy, heavy, maximally indulgent dishes that someone like Jin or Jungkook would dive into without a second thought, Namjoon will eat them, but there's often a visible internal negotiation happening, a should-I moment that the other less picky members simply don't experience. And this is where cooking for Namjoon gets genuinely tricky, because his pickiness isn't consistent in the way that makes a chef's job easy. It's contextual. On a day when Namjoon has just finished an intense workout and his body is craving protein and calories, he might happily demolish a massive plate of samgyeopsal without a trace of hesitation. But on a day when he's been reading about plant-based nutrition or has been thinking about environmental sustainability, and yes, Namjoon thinks about these things because of course he does, that same plate of samgyeopsal might get a more measured, more restrained response. The dish hasn't changed, the chef hasn't changed, but Namjoon's framework for evaluating the dish has shifted, and suddenly what was a green light yesterday is a yellow light today. Staff members have described this phenomenon with a mixture of respect and gentle exasperation. One food coordinator reportedly said that planning Namjoon's meals was like cooking for someone whose taste buds have a reading list. The preferences were always evolving based on whatever Namjoon was currently learning, thinking about, or being influenced by. One month he'd be deeply interested in traditional Korean fermented foods after reading about gut microbiome research. The next month he'd be curious about Mediterranean diet principles after encountering a compelling book on longevity science. The month after that he'd circle back to simple comfort food because he'd been reflecting on the emotional importance of uncomplicated meals. Each phase was genuine, each phase was thoughtful, and each phase required the people feeding him to essentially recalibrate their approach. Let's also talk about Namjoon's relationship to cooking itself, because it adds another fascinating layer to his food personality. Namjoon is famously, almost legendarily, clumsy. The god of destruction nickname didn't come from nowhere. He breaks things, he bumps into things. His fine motor coordination, despite being a powerful performer on stage, seems to abandon him entirely in domestic settings, and the kitchen is no exception.
During Run BTS cooking episodes, Namjoon's cooking attempts have ranged from valiantly mediocre to genuinely concerning, and the other members, particularly Jin and Suga, have expressed varying degrees of alarm at letting him near sharp objects and open flames. But here's the interesting part. Despite not being a skilled cook, Namjoon has strong opinions about how food should taste. He knows what he wants, even if he can't produce it himself. This is the classic analytical palate paradox, the person who can critique a dish with genuine insight but couldn't replicate it to save their life. And it means that when someone else is cooking for him, Namjoon's standards are informed by understanding rather than ability, which creates expectations that are sometimes surprisingly specific. He might not be able to articulate it in professional culinary terminology, but he knows when a seasoning balance is off, when a protein is overcooked, when a sauce needs more acidity. He knows because he's thought about it, because he's read about it, because his endlessly curious brain has absorbed culinary information the same way it absorbs everything else, thoroughly, analytically, and with a retention rate that catches people off guard. There's also the solitary eating dimension, which is subtly but meaningfully relevant. Namjoon, more than most BTS members, seems to genuinely enjoy eating alone, not in a sad, lonely way, in a contemplative, intentional way. He's been seen and photographed dining solo at restaurants, visiting cafes alone with a book, eating quietly in corners of venues during tour breaks while the other members eat together. And solo diners tend to be pickier because when you're eating alone, every element of the meal is amplified. There's no conversation to distract from a dish that's mediocre. There's no social energy to compensate for food that doesn't quite meet expectations. It's just you and the plate, and if the plate doesn't deliver, you feel it more acutely. Namjoon's solo dining habits suggest a person who takes individual meals seriously, who curates his eating experiences with the same intentionality he brings to choosing which books to read or which exhibitions to visit. That curation, by definition, is a form of selectiveness. So where does all of this place Namjoon? Right here, at number 4. Past the midpoint, solidly in the pickier than average zone, but not yet in the territory of the members who are about to occupy the top 3. Namjoon's pickiness isn't loud, it isn't dramatic, it isn't the kind that creates scenes or sends plates back. It's quiet, cerebral, ever-evolving, and rooted in a mind that simply cannot turn off its analytical engine, even when the task at hand is as primal and simple as eating a meal. He's the member who makes chefs feel like they're being intellectually evaluated with every bite, not because he's judgmental, but because he is, thoughtfully, respectfully, inevitably evaluative. And cooking for a mind that never stops thinking, that's its own unique kind of challenge. But if Namjoon's cerebral selectiveness puts him at number 4, then brace yourself, because the top 3 is where things get real. The next member's pickiness isn't philosophical, it isn't subtle, it's visceral, instinctive, and expressed with an honesty that has left more than one chef standing in a kitchen wondering what just happened. Number 3 is coming, and it's gonna hit different.
Number 3, J-Hope. Number 3, the top 3. And we are officially entering the zone where having preferences stops being a cute personality trait and starts being a genuine operational challenge for anyone responsible for putting food on these members' plates. At number 3, standing at the podium of BTS's pickiest eaters with absolutely zero apology and even less pretense, is Jungkook, J-Hope, the eternal sunshine. The man whose energy could power a small city. The member who walks into every room like the room has been waiting for him specifically. Whose smile is so radiant that it has literally been described by fans as a renewable energy source. And yet, put a dish in front of this man that doesn't meet his very specific, very instinctive, very non-negotiable taste criteria, and that sunshine face will tell you everything you need to know before a single word leaves his mouth. Because here's the truth about Jungkook that makes him fundamentally different from every member we've discussed so far. Hoseok cannot hide his food reactions. Not won't, cannot. His face is, has always been, and will forever be the most honest food review system in the entire K-pop industry. Jin will eat anything and find something nice to say. Jungkook will quietly avoid what he doesn't like without making a scene. Taehyung will politely eat while internally longing for his grandmother's cooking. Namjoon will intellectually process his mild disappointment with a thoughtful expression that could pass for contemplation. But Hoseok, the second an unwanted flavor,
texture or aroma hits his senses, his face goes through a full cinematic journey. The widened eyes of surprise, the micro-flinch of displeasure, the involuntary lip curl, and then the full body reaction that the other members have learned to watch for because it is always entertaining and always genuine. This isn't performance. This isn't variety show exaggeration. Multiple people who've worked with BTS in food-adjacent settings have confirmed that what you see on camera is exactly what happens off camera. Hoseok's taste reactions are hardwired into his nervous system, and no amount of idle training has been able to install a filter between his taste buds and his facial expressions. And from a chef's perspective, that kind of brutal, involuntary honesty is simultaneously the most useful and the most terrifying feedback system imaginable. Useful because you never have to guess. If Hoseok doesn't like it, you know within approximately 0.3 seconds. Terrifying because that visceral, unfiltered reaction happening in real time in front of you feels less like a dining experience and more like a live performance review where the critic has zero poker face. Now, let's get into the specifics because Hoseok's pickiness isn't random. It follows very clear patterns that become obvious once you start paying attention, and they center around 3 primary triggers: smell, texture, and the unfamiliar. Let's start with smell, because this is arguably Hoseok's most sensitive and most consequential food trigger. Jung Hoseok has an intensely reactive relationship with food aromas, and not in the, that smells delicious way. In the, if this smells wrong to me, my entire body is going to reject it before it even reaches my mouth way. Strong, pungent, fermented, or unfamiliar odors trigger a visible, physical response in Hoseok that goes beyond mere distaste. It's closer to a genuine sensory defense mechanism. During filmed content, you can find multiple instances where dishes with strong aromatic profiles, certain aged cheeses, particular fermented preparations, heavily spiced dishes from cuisines he's unfamiliar with, cause Hoseok to physically lean back, create distance between himself and the plate, and sometimes even cover his nose with a hand or sleeve in a gesture that's so automatic and self-conscious that it's clearly not played up for cameras. Staff members from international tour catering teams have specifically noted that Hoseok's first interaction with any new dish is olfactory. He smells it before he even looks at it closely, and if the smell doesn't pass his internal checkpoint, the chances of him actually tasting it drop dramatically. This isn't unusual from a biological perspective. Smell and taste are neurologically intertwined, and people with heightened olfactory sensitivity almost always have more selective eating patterns. But it is unusual in its intensity for someone who regularly travels the world and is exposed to an extraordinary variety of cuisines. And here's what makes this particularly interesting from a Gwangju context. Hoseok grew up in Gwangju, the capital of South Jeolla province, which is arguably the most food-celebrated region in all of South Korea. Jeolla province cuisine is legendary. It's known for elaborate banchan spreads, complex fermentation traditions, bold flavors, and a culinary heritage so rich that Koreans from other regions specifically travel to Jeolla for the food. You would think that growing up surrounded by this incredible food culture would produce someone with an adventurous, wide-open palate. And in some ways it did. Hoseok genuinely appreciates and loves well-made Korean food, particularly the Jeolla-style preparations he grew up eating. But it also set an extremely high and extremely specific baseline for what good food means to him. When your childhood food culture is one of the most sophisticated and flavorful in the country, everything else gets measured against that standard, and a lot of things come up short. It's like growing up in Bordeaux and then being asked to get excited about mass-produced supermarket wine. The reference point is simply too high for mediocrity to pass without detection. Now let's talk about texture, because this is where Hoseok's pickiness gets really specific and where chefs start taking detailed notes. Hoseok has documented, repeatedly demonstrated aversions to certain food textures that are remarkably consistent across years of filmed content. Anything excessively slimy, gelatinous, or mucilaginous, a category that includes raw oysters, certain preparations of okra, natto, some types of raw seafood, and various gelatinous desserts, gets the full Hoseok face reaction treatment. And it's not something he can power through, unlike some people who have texture aversions but can override them with enough social pressure or
willpower, Hoseok's texture reactions appear to be genuinely involuntary. During one memorable Run BTS segment involving unusual food challenges, Hoseok's attempts to eat a texture-triggering dish resulted in a reaction so visceral and so genuine that even the production staff reportedly felt bad about including it, but ultimately did because it was too authentic and too revealing to cut. His body literally said no, not his mind, not his preference, his body. And that's a level of food selectivity that transcends choice and enters the realm of genuine sensory sensitivity. Then there's the unfamiliarity factor, and this is where Hoseok's position at number 3 really solidifies. Hoseok has a pronounced neophobic response to new foods, meaning his default reaction to something he's never seen, smelled, or tasted before is caution bordering on resistance. Neophobia is a well-documented psychological phenomenon, and it exists on a spectrum. Some people are mildly cautious with new foods, others experience genuine anxiety. Hoseok falls somewhere in the upper middle range of that spectrum, where new foods don't cause distress, but do trigger a visible, consistent pattern of hesitation, questioning, and conditional engagement. Watch BTS travel content carefully, Bon Voyage, their various reality show appearances, behind-the-scenes tour footage, and you'll see this pattern repeat like clockwork. A new dish arrives at the table, Jin immediately starts eating, Jungkook watches for a second and then follows, Taehyung engages quietly, Namjoon examines it thoughtfully, but Hoseok goes through a whole process. First, the visual assessment. He looks at the dish from multiple angles, his face cycling through various expressions as he processes what he's seeing. Then the smell check, leaning in cautiously, testing the aromatic waters. Then the interrogation. What is this? What's in it? Is it spicy? Is it raw? Has anyone tried it? Then, and only then, the tentative first bite, taken with the kind of careful, deliberate energy of someone diffusing a bomb rather than eating lunch. And here's the crucial detail. Sometimes, after all of that process, the dish is great and Hoseok loves it and eats enthusiastically and radiates the same golden energy that he brings to everything else in his life. But step outside that comfort zone and you're entering a negotiation where Hoseok's nose, eyes, tongue, and entire facial musculature are all voting independently, and they don't always agree, and when they disagree, the result is visible from across the room. Let's also address the chicken thing, because it deserves its own paragraph. Jung Hoseok loves chicken. This is not a casual like, this is a deep, committed, almost spiritual devotion. Fried chicken specifically, but also grilled chicken, chicken soup, chicken skewers, chicken in virtually any preparation that doesn't violate his smell or texture boundaries. Multiple members have joked about Hoseok's chicken consumption, and it's become one of those affectionate inside BTS observations that surfaces regularly. And while loving chicken isn't inherently picky, the degree to which Hoseok defaults to chicken when uncertain about other options is a picky indicator. It's a safety food, a guaranteed satisfaction choice. And the frequency with which someone reaches for their safety food is directly proportional to how uncomfortable they are with culinary risk. Hoseok reaches for chicken a lot. And the sweet tooth, Hoseok's love of sweets and desserts, is another dimension that rounds out his food profile. He gravitates towards sweet flavors with genuine enthusiasm, from Korean desserts to chocolate to ice cream and various confections. This preference for sweet flavors, combined with his aversion to strong, savory aromas and unfamiliar textures, paints a clear picture of a palate that prefers comfort, familiarity, and pleasantness over complexity, challenge, and novelty. It's not a childish palate, it's a protective palate, one that has very clear boundaries about what constitutes an enjoyable eating experience and enforces those boundaries with the most expressively honest face in the music industry. So number 3 belongs firmly, deservedly, and entertainingly to Jung Hoseok, the member whose relationship with food is a live show in itself, whose face reviews every dish faster than any food critic could type, and whose pickiness isn't quiet or cerebral or nostalgic, but loud, visceral, and magnificently, unapologetically honest. But if you think Hoseok's unfiltered food reactions are intense, if you think his smell sensitivity and texture aversions put him high on this list, then you are absolutely not prepared for what's waiting at number 2. Because the next member doesn't just have preferences, the next member has an entire system, and that system has made more than one professional chef question their career choices. Get ready.
Number 2. Suga. Number 2, we are one step away from the crown, one spot away from the member who sits at the absolute peak of BTS's Picky Eater Mountain. But before we get there, we need to talk about the man who came this close to claiming the top spot. And honestly, on certain days, depending on certain moods, certain meals, and certain invisible internal calculations that no one else can fully decode, he might actually deserve it. Min Yoongi, Suga, August D, the quiet genius. The man who speaks in short, devastating sentences, who moves through the world with the energy of someone who has already calculated every possible outcome and decided which ones are worth his time. And when it comes to food, that exact same energy, that precise, efficient, ruthlessly selective approach to life translates into the most systematic form of pickiness on this entire list. Because here's what separates Yoongi from everyone we've talked about so far. Hoseok is picky and he shows it. Namjoon is picky and he thinks about it. Taehyung is picky and he feels it. But Yoongi? Yoongi is picky and he has already made his decision before the food arrives at the table. Silently. Completely, irreversibly. No discussion, no negotiation, no dramatic facial reactions, just a quiet, absolute verdict delivered through the most subtle set of behavioral cues that only the people who know him well have learned to read, and by the time they've read them, it's already too late. The plate has been weighed, measured, and found wanting, and no amount of chef credentials, premium ingredients, or enthusiastic recommendations is going to change the outcome. Staff members and food professionals who've worked with BTS have consistently identified Yoongi as one of the most challenging members to feed, not because he's difficult or demanding in a diva sense, not because he complains or causes scenes, but because his selectiveness operates on a level that's almost impossible to predict from the outside. With Hoseok, you could watch his face and know instantly what's working and what isn't. With Yoongi, you watch him take one calm, measured bite, see absolutely no readable expression on his face, and then observe as the chopsticks simply don't go back for a second bite. That's it. That's the review. No words, no face, just the absence of a second bite. And if you're a chef who's poured hours of effort into a dish, that silent, expressionless, devastatingly final one-bite assessment might be the most brutal feedback you've ever received, precisely because it gives you nothing to work with. No complaint to address, no suggestion to implement, just silence and an untouched plate that speaks louder than any words ever could. Let's trace this back to Daegu, because like Taehyung's Gochang roots and Hoseok's Gwangju foundation, Yoongi's food personality is inseparable from where he comes from. Min Yoongi grew up in Daegu, the third largest city in South Korea and the heart of Gyeongsang Province's culinary identity. Daegu food is aggressive. There's no other word for it. It's saltier than Seoul food, it's spicier than most other regional Korean cuisines, it's bold, direct, and unapologetic, food that hits you in the face and doesn't apologize for it. Daegu-style jjigae is saltier. Daegu-style kimchi is more intensely seasoned. Daegu's famous makchang, grilled pork intestines, is a dish that requires a certain fearlessness just order, let alone enjoy. Growing up eating food with this kind of intensity does something specific to your palate. It calibrates your baseline to strong. And once your baseline is set to strong, anything that falls below that threshold, anything too mild, too subtle, too delicately seasoned, registers as bland. Not bad, not offensive, just insufficient. And this is exactly the pattern that emerges when you study Yoongi's food behavior across years of content. He gravitates toward big, bold, assertive flavors. Properly seasoned Korean BBQ, samgyeopsal grilled to exactly the right level of char, wrapped in lettuce with a generous smear of samjang, a slice of raw garlic, and a piece of grilled kimchi. That's Yoongi's happy place. Not because it's fancy, but because it's intense. Every element in that single bite is punching at full volume. The smoky fat of the pork, the sharp bite of raw garlic, the fermented funk of samjang, the sour heat of grilled kimchi. That's a flavor bomb, and Yoongi's palate is calibrated to that level of impact. Now, imagine you're a chef on an international tour and you're serving this man a delicately poached piece of fish with a light beurre blanc sauce and a garnish of microgreens. Technically flawless, beautifully presented, and to Yoongi's Daegu-forged palate, whispering when he needs someone to shout. Not wrong, just not enough. And the fish comes back barely touched, and you're left wondering what happened. And what happened is that you brought a watercolor to a man who speaks in oil paint. But Yoongi's pickiness goes beyond just wanting bold flavors. It extends into a domain that is uniquely, unmistakably his, the domain of systematic eating. Min Yoongi eats with a methodology that, once you become aware of it, is genuinely fascinating to observe. He doesn't eat randomly. He doesn't graze, he doesn't nibble here and there and mix flavors chaotically like some people do. He eats in an order.
Rice, then specific banchan in a specific rotation, then protein, then soup. Each element addressed deliberately, sequentially, almost ritualistically. It's not OCD, it's not a disorder, it's a system that Yoongi has developed, refined, and internalized so completely that deviating from it causes visible discomfort. And when a meal doesn't accommodate this system, when the dishes arrive in the wrong order, when the elements of a meal are combined in ways that disrupt his preferred eating flow, when a chef's artistic plating concept forces him to eat components in a sequence that doesn't match his internal program, Yoongi doesn't adapt, he reconfigures the plate. Silently, methodically, he'll deconstruct a carefully plated dish and rearrange it into his preferred layout before eating. Staff members have watched this happen with expressions that range from amused to mildly horrified. A chef spends 20 minutes plating a beautiful, composed dish, and Yoongi spends 30 seconds calmly dismantling it into separate piles so he can eat each component on his own terms. It's not disrespectful, it's not intentional critique, it's just Yoongi being Yoongi, a man who needs control over his environment, including his plate. Then there's the appetite factor, which amplifies everything we've discussed so far. Min Yoongi has, by multiple accounts and by visible evidence across hundreds of hours of filmed content, one of the smallest appetites in BTS. He eats less than most of the other members. His portions are consistently smaller. He reaches satiety faster. And when you combine a small appetite with high selectiveness, you get a mathematical reality that terrifies chefs. Every single bite matters more. A person with a big appetite can afford to waste a few bites on things they don't love. They'll fill up on volume regardless. But a person who only eats a small amount to begin with, every bite needs to count. Every mouthful needs to justify its place in a limited daily intake. And if a particular dish doesn't justify its place, Yoongi simply won't eat it. He'll wait for the next meal. He'll eat less. He'll drink coffee instead, because coffee with Yoongi is its own legendary chapter, a devotion so deep and so consistent that coffee has essentially become a meal replacement on days when the actual food options don't meet his standards. Multiple members have commented on Yoongi's tendency to substitute meals with Americanos, and while it's often mentioned as a funny character trait, from a nutritional standpoint, it reveals something significant. Yoongi would rather consume nothing of substance than consume food that doesn't satisfy his specific criteria. That's not casual preference, that's a deeply ingrained selectiveness that affects his actual eating patterns. And let's talk about his cooking, because this adds another critical layer to understanding Yoongi's food personality. Unlike Namjoon, who can barely boil water without triggering a safety alert, Yoongi can actually cook, and he cooks well. During In the Soup and various Run BTS episodes, Yoongi has demonstrated genuine culinary competence, proper knife skills, understanding of heat control, knowledge of seasoning, ability to produce dishes that the other members enthusiastically devour. And here's the thing about picky eaters who can cook. They're pickier because they can cook. When you know how food should taste, not theoretically like Namjoon, but practically from hands-on experience, your tolerance for substandard preparation drops significantly. Yoongi knows when meat is overcooked because he knows exactly how long it should have been on the grill. He knows when seasoning is imbalanced because he's balanced it himself. He knows when rice is wrong because he's made it right. That practical knowledge creates a set of standards that he applies to every meal, whether he cooked it or someone else did. And those standards are high. Not pretentious high, not foodie snob high, just quietly, firmly, uncompromisingly high in a way that leaves no room for mediocrity. His relationship with specific foods also reveals a map of preferences that is remarkably narrow for someone who's traveled the world. Beyond Korean BBQ, Yoongi has shown consistent affection for a relatively limited roster of foods. Tangerines. His love for tangerines is well documented and adorable, one of those unexpected soft spots that make Yoongi's whole tough exterior persona crack. Lamb. Coffee, simple Korean stews, good rice, emphasis on good because Yoongi can tell the difference between properly cooked rice and slightly off rice with a reliability that rice cooker manufacturers would envy. And beyond that core roster, things get unpredictable. Some international cuisines land well with him, others don't, and the determining factors seem to follow no logic that external observers can consistently decode. Which brings us back to the fundamental challenge of cooking for Min Yoongi. He's a black box with a Daegu-calibrated palate, a systematic eating methodology, a small appetite that makes every bite a high-stakes decision, cooking skills that elevate his standards, and an expressionless poker face that gives you absolutely no real-time feedback. You cook, You serve, you watch, you wait, and either the chopsticks keep moving, which means you've passed the test, or they stop after one bite, and Yoongi reaches for his Americano, and you know in that quiet, devastating moment that your dish has been silently, efficiently, permanently filed under not enough. That is number 2 energy. That is Min Yoongi. The silent menu assassin who doesn't need words, facial expressions, or dramatic reactions to be one of the pickiest eaters in BTS because his silence speaks louder than anyone else's complaints ever could. But if Yoongi, with his impossible standards, his eating systems, his poker face, and his coffee over bad food philosophy is still only number 2, then who in the world is number 1? Who could possibly be more challenging to feed than this man? The answer is coming. And when I tell you that the number 1 spot isn't even close, that the gap between number 2 and number 1 is
Number 1. Jimin. Number 1. The summit, the peak, the absolute, undeniable, unchallenged throne at the top of the picky eater mountain. And if you've been watching this list carefully, if you've tracked the escalation from Jin's boundless appetite to Jungkook's meat-centric comfort zone to Taehyung's nostalgic soul palette to Namjoon's philosophical evaluations to Hosok's visceral face reactions to Yoongi's silent assassination system, then you already feel it in your gut. You know who's sitting here. You've probably known since the intro, but knowing it and understanding the full, complicated, deeply human, deeply emotional depth of why this member occupies this spot, those are 2 very different things. Park Jimin, the man whose voice can make an entire stadium hold its breath, the dancer whose body moves with a precision and grace that choreographers describe as once in a generation, the performer who gives every stage 110% every single time, without exception, without reservation, without saving anything for tomorrow. Park Jimin, who approaches his art with a level of perfectionism so absolute, so consuming, so relentless that it has shaped not just how he performs, not just how he practices, not just how he presents himself to the world, but how he eats. And that right there is the core of everything we're about to unpack. Because Jimin's position at number 1 on this list isn't just about taste preferences. It isn't just about liking or disliking certain flavors. It isn't just about texture aversions or smell sensitivities or neophobic responses to unfamiliar cuisines. It's about something far more complex, far more layered, and far more emotionally heavy than anything we've discussed in the previous 6 entries. Jimin's relationship with food is the most complicated relationship with food in BTS, period, full stop. And to understand it, really, truly understand it, we need to go deep. We need to go all the way back to Busan, to a trainee dorm in Seoul, to the mirrors of a practice room where a young man decided that perfection wasn't just a goal, but a requirement, and to the plates of food that became, somewhere along the way, both a source of comfort and a source of conflict. Let's start with the most visible, most documented, most frequently discussed aspect of Jimin's food personality, the portions, or more accurately, the lack of portions. Because across literally hundreds of hours of filmed BTS content spanning over a decade, Bangtan Bombs, V-Lives, Run BTS episodes, Bon Voyage seasons, In the Soup, concert behind the scenes, variety show appearances, casual vlogs, there is a pattern so consistent, so unmistakable, and so persistent that it has become one of the defining observational data points of Jimin's entire public persona. Park Jimin eats less than everyone else. Always. In virtually every filmed group meal, Jimin's plate is the smallest. His portions are the most modest, his eating speed is the slowest, and his plate at the end of the meal is the one most likely to still have food on it, not because he's saving it, not because he's distracted, but because he simply stopped. The chopsticks went down. The meal was declared internally complete, and the food that remained was left as silent evidence of an appetite that operates on fundamentally different parameters than his bandmates. Staff members who've managed group dining logistics over the years have confirmed this pattern with remarkable consistency. When ordering food for BTS as a group, the general rule, spoken or unspoken, was that Jimin's portion should be smaller. Not because anyone wanted to restrict him, but because ordering him the same amount as the other members meant guaranteed waste. He simply wouldn't eat it, couldn't eat it.
His satiety threshold kicks in earlier, his interest in continuing to eat diminishes faster, and his willingness to push past the point of comfortable fullness is essentially zero. And this is where we need to address the elephant in the room, the part of this conversation that fans have debated, worried about, analyzed, and discussed for years. Jimin's relationship with food is not purely about taste. It is inextricably, unavoidably, profoundly connected to his relationship with his body. And while this is sensitive territory that deserves careful, respectful handling, ignoring it would make this analysis dishonest, because it is the central factor that places Jimin at number 1, and it is the reason why the gap between him and number 2 is as wide as a canyon. Jimin has spoken about this himself, in interviews, in documentaries, in moments of raw honesty that have been praised for their bravery and mourned for their necessity. Jimin has acknowledged that he has, at various points in his career, restricted his eating significantly. During the Blood, Sweat, and Tears era, one of BTS's most iconic comebacks, Jimin revealed in a later interview that he had gone through a period of eating only one meal a day, sometimes less, driven by a desire to achieve a specific physical appearance that he believed was necessary for the concept, for the performance, for the fans. Let that settle for a moment. One meal a day. For one of the most physically demanding performers in modern pop music, a man who dances for hours, who performs routines that would exhaust professional athletes, who gives every stage the kind of full-body commitment that leaves him drenched in sweat and gasping for air. One meal a day. The other members have not been silent about this. Jin, in particular, has been repeatedly documented encouraging, sometimes practically begging Jimin to eat more. There are Bangtan bomb moments that have become legendary in the fandom. Jin physically placing food in front of Jimin, Jin watching Jimin's plate with visible concern, Jin making comments that walk the delicate line between gentle humor and genuine worry. Jimin, eat more. Jimin, you haven't eaten enough. Jimin, please. These aren't scripted moments. These are real human interactions between friends who love each other captured on camera, revealing a dynamic that is clearly played out thousands of times off-camera in privacy of dorms, dressing rooms, and late-night conversations. Jungkook, too, the maknae who idolizes Jimin, who watches his hung with the attentive eyes of someone who notices everything, has been seen quietly pushing food toward Jimin during group meals, adding side dishes to Jimin's plate without being asked, creating gentle, wordless encouragements to eat that reveal a level of awareness and care that goes far beyond casual observation. And Yoongi, the man who occupies number 2 on this very list, who himself is selective and small-appetited, has made comments about Jimin's eating that carry the weight of someone who recognizes the difference between being picky and being in a genuinely complicated relationship with food. When even the second pickiest eater in the group is concerned about your eating habits, that tells you something. But here's what makes Jimin's story not just the most complex food story in BTS, but arguably one of the most complex food stories in all of K-pop. It's not just picky. It's not just selective. It's the most human, most vulnerable, most emotionally layered relationship with food on this entire list. And it belongs, without a shadow of a doubt, at number 1. Park Jimin, the most picky eater in BTS, not because he's difficult, not because he's demanding, but because for him, every meal carries a weight that the rest of us can barely imagine, and he navigates that weight with the same grace, the same beauty, and the same quiet strength that he brings to everything else in his extraordinary life.
And there it is, the full list. 7 members. 7 completely different relationships with food. 7 stories that, when you line them up side by side, reveal something far more profound than just who eats what and who sends plates back. Because this was never really about being picky, was it? Not at its core. What this list actually revealed, what a personal chef sees that fans watching mukbang V-Lives never fully grasp, is that how a person eats is a direct mirror of who they are. Jin at number 7, the man who loves food the way he loves life, fully, joyfully, without apology, without restriction, with the kind of open-armed embrace that has made him the emotional anchor of this group for over a decade. His relationship with food is his relationship with the world. Come as you are, I'll find something to love about you. Jungkook, number 6, the golden maknae who eats the way he trains, with intensity, with focus, with a gravitational pull toward what's comfortable and familiar, because a kid who left home at 15 learned early that some things are worth holding on to, and a plate of lamb skewers at midnight tastes a lot like safety. V at number 5, the countryside soul whose taste buds never left Gyeochang, who carries his grandmother's kitchen in every bite, who reminds us that no matter how far you travel, no matter how many stadiums you fill, the flavors of home are the only ones that truly make your shoulders drop and your heart settle. RM at number 4, the thinker who can't turn his brain off even at the dinner table, who evaluates every meal the way he evaluates every lyric, thoughtfully, rigorously, with standards that evolve as fast as his ever-expanding mind. Because for Namjoon, even eating is an opportunity to learn something. J-Hope at number 3, the human sunshine whose face tells the truth faster than his words ever could, whose pickiness isn't calculated but instinctive, raw, unfiltered, magnificently honest, because Jung Ho-suk has never been able to pretend about anything, and food is no exception. Suga at number 2, the silent strategist who turned eating into a system, whose poker face reveals nothing while his untouched plate reveals everything, who would rather drink a black Americano than waste a single bite on something that doesn't meet the exacting standards of a Daegu-born perfectionist who knows exactly what he wants and refuses to settle for less. And Jimin, number 1, the beautiful paradox, the member whose relationship with food carries more emotional weight, more complexity, more invisible battles than any plate of food should ever have to hold, the man who navigates every meal with the same grace he brings to every stage, quietly, beautifully, bravely, and who reminds us in the most intimate and human way possible that sometimes the hardest things aren't the choreographies or the world tours or the sold-out stadiums. Sometimes the hardest thing is just sitting down, picking up your chopsticks, and allowing yourself to eat without the weight of the world on every bite. 7 members, 7 palates, 7 windows into the private, unguarded, deeply personal moments that happen 3 times a day, every day, away from the cameras and the screaming crowds and the flashing lights. And what a personal chef sees in those moments, what they learn about a person by watching how they interact with a plate of food, is something that no interview, no documentary, no behind-the-scenes footage can fully capture. Because food is truth. Food is vulnerability. Food is the one daily act that strips away the performance and leaves nothing but the person. And these 7 people, they're exactly as extraordinary at the dinner table as they are on stage, just in completely different ways. So the next time you watch BTS eat together, in a V-Live, in a Bangtan Bomb, in whatever content comes next in their incredible, still unfolding story, watch closer. Watch Jin reach for seconds with pure joy. Watch Jungkook demolish the meat before anything else. Watch Taehyung's eyes soften when the food tastes like home. Watch Namjoon pause mid-bite to think about what he's tasting. Watch Hosuk's face before his words catch up. Watch Yoongi's chopsticks. Do they go back for a second bite or don't they? And watch Jimin. Watch him carefully. Watch him with love. Because every meal is a small, quiet, invisible act of courage, and that is something worth seeing. This has been Personal Chef Reveals which BTS member is the picky eater. If this list made you see these 7 men just a little differently, if it made you think about food as more than just food, if it made you feel something, then it did exactly what it was supposed to do. Until next time.